I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to have an answer and to say something wise and helpful. It's almost like it makes us underestimate how powerful it is to simply listen. So we're going to be in a Bible passage today that's in Mark 10, and Jesus was traveling with his followers as he often does, and he had just been healing and teaching and feeding people as he often was. But in this story, he's kind of leaving the town. He's moving on. He's on the road. And on the side of the road is a blind man who is sitting there and he's begging. And this guy yells out and says, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, what you've got to know about this scene is it was very crowded. There were people everywhere. This was the time during Passover. And this was a place that was sort of the last stop on your way to Jerusalem where everybody was going to celebrate Passover. And so it was very crowded. Imagine like Times Square on New Year's Eve, like very, very crowded. So in the midst of all this noise, all this crowd, this blind man yells for help. The people nearest around him heard him yelling, and they told him to stop. The verse in 48 says, "Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.'" So the people around this guy, they hear him. They hear him asking for help, but they don't want to listen. They basically told him to shut up. But Jesus also heard him. This is what Jesus says. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And so they called to the blind man, "Cheer up on your feet. He's calling you." And throwing his cloak aside, he jumped up to his feet and he came to Jesus. And then, as a way to listen, Jesus asks one little question. "What do you want me to do for you?" Pretty short, direct question. And the man gives a pretty direct answer. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." Verse 52, "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." And immediately he received his sight and he followed Jesus along the road. Now this man had a lot of walls around him, causing him to be unlistened to. He was blind. He was begging on the side of the road. He would have been seen as like one of the lowest in society. There was a lot of reasons for this man that he would have felt unlistened to. People didn't engage with him. We're going to dig into that more in a minute. But with one little question, Jesus makes the wall start to fall down. And they're standing on the side of the road together outside the city. And he invites this man to be listened to by everyone around him. And it all started with Jesus. One thing we skipped is what city this was, the city that Jesus was in on his way to Jerusalem. Well, this city was called Jericho. And if you've ever heard of Jericho, probably the most thing that you think about is that Jericho is all about walls. There was a story in Israel's ancient history where they were up against the people of Jericho, and God gave them a very unique battle plan, which we read about those kind of unique battle plans a lot in the Old Testament. And he said, instead of just going in and trying to fight, here's what I want you to do. There is a fortified wall around this city, and I'm going to ask you every day for the week, march around it once. And by the last day, you're going to march around it 7 times, and then you're going to blow your trumpets and shout. And here's what it says in Joshua chapter 6. When the trumpet sounded and the army shouted, at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. And so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. If you've ever heard of Jericho, chances are you associate it with walls coming down. And here's Jesus, hundreds of years later, bringing down more walls because he chose to listen and engage with somebody to make sure that they felt heard. I want to unpack a little bit about what was kind of happening and why it is that listening made the wall come down between Jesus and this blind man, because I know it looks like just a little tiny conversation, but there's so much more happening, and it's going to help us see why listening matters so much. What we saw in the passage was there was this shift in the people around the blind man when Jesus gave him his attention. Did we notice that? Remember, at first they were like, dude, stop yelling. You're being embarrassing. Stop. But then Jesus gives him his attention, and then suddenly they change their tune. Suddenly they're like, oh, wait, he actually wants to talk to you. Go, get up, go to Jesus. This is great news. They did a total 180. Jesus' choice to listen to the blind man, to engage the blind man, was a way to show him value. Dallas Willard, who was known for his work and his writing and Christian spiritual formation, he said, the first act of love is always the giving of attention. When we intentionally listen to people, what we're showing them is that they're valued, that we care about them. I mean, for this guy, who knows how long it had been where he had felt valued and paid attention to. And so when Jesus gives him attention, he's saying, you are important, you matter, I wanna hear from you. And he asks this one little question and the whole dynamic shifts. All the attention was on Jesus, but he put all the attention on this man, and the walls break down a little bit more. And that's what listening does. It makes room for the other person to be the center of your attention. Listening makes it about them. Every once in a while in my life, I come across that kind of person that I would describe as like a one-upper. I don't know if any of you have someone like this in your life, but if you tell a story, don't worry, they will have a bigger and better and funnier story than you, and they'll tell it right after. And then when they tell their story, if by any chance it makes you think of another story of yours and you share that, don't worry, they'll have a bigger and better and funnier story that they will tell you. And in a conversation like this, you're never going to be the last one to talk. They're always going to have something else to say. And I know that's kind of extreme, but I do think there's something in it for us. Like, as we think about the conversations that we're having and how we're doing at making it about the other person, do you tend to do more of the talking than the listening? Like, when you're with someone, does the flow of conversation tend to be more one-sided toward you? Is there more like coming from you than is coming at you? Or do you tend to talk more than listen? Now, I'm an extrovert, so I try to be really sensitive about this, but I know not all of you are, and so there might be some of you in this room who have never had a conversation in your life where you have done most of the talking. Because you think differently, you take time to actually process what you're gonna say, whatever it is. But even for you, it's important to ask, like, when you're not talking, are you actually listening? Are you actually giving the other person your full attention? Because just because we're not talking doesn't really mean that we're listening. Sometimes we're busy thinking about what we're gonna say, right? That's the psychological noise that we talked about, where other things are kind of going on in our mind. And when that happens, you can't really receive what someone else is gonna say. And so that's what's so beautiful about how Jesus asked this question to the blind man. He just says, what do you want? And it's this whole posture of him just being open for whatever this man is going to say. And there's just a lot of honor in that. Jesus is honoring him by letting him say what he wants, have his own agency, call out what he wants to have, and being interested in that person. And that's something else that listening does. It honors the person. Honor was a big part of their culture. There was almost nothing as important as maintaining honor. You know, we've referred to this man as the blind man so far, just without a name, just the blind man. And this story that we read, 3 of the 4 Gospels tell this same story. But what's interesting about Mark's telling, that's the book that we're in, is that he says his name. He doesn't just call him the blind man. He says Bartimaeus. Can you say Bartimaeus with me? Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus. Bar means son. Son of Timaeus. And that name Timaeus actually means honored and valued. Now, the truth is, we don't know anything about his father, but if Bartimaeus came from a family of honor, he certainly hadn't been experiencing that honor. Being a blind man who's on the side of the road begging, he was very used to being ignored. And that's why I said that one little question that Jesus asks there was so much more packed into it. What he was doing is restoring honor to this man just by asking a question and then listening to the answer. And then, of course, in Jesus' case, healing him. I don't know if you ever feel this way, but I feel like sometimes as Christians, we feel like we have to have all the answers for everyone. Like we have to be people who give really like godly advice, or we have to be able to answer like why we believe the way we do, which incidentally, there is a verse in the Bible that says you should be able to answer why you believe what you do. But I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to have an answer and to say something wise and helpful that it's almost like it makes us underestimate how powerful it is to simply listen. Because for someone in your life who's asking about God or is interested in faith, they might be doing that, but at the end of the day, they want to feel listened to. So if we can enter conversation with like genuine interest in someone and genuine curiosity and truly wanting to get to know them, they will feel loved. And feeling loved is one of the ways we experience God. I mean, yeah, they might want to know about God, but how cool is it to help them have an experience of God through feeling loved? When you deeply listen to someone, they will feel loved. One of my professors in seminary was named David Augsburger, and in one of his books, he was pastoral care and counseling, and he wrote many books, and one of them he said this: being heard is as close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Last week when we started this series, I told you that as followers of Jesus, we are called to help bring other people to Jesus, but it can't just start by converting them. It's got to start with loving them, being in relationship with them. And that relationship is built on finding ways to be a blessing to them, spending time with them, actually becoming friends. And that won't happen if we are not good listeners. There's one more part of Bartimaeus' story I want to show you, and that is this. He became a follower of Jesus. Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." And then it says that Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." And he was healed. And then it says he followed Jesus along the road. Now, at first, it kind of sounds like he just went with them for a little while. But what you've got to know is that word follow, it's got two meanings. One is, just to follow somebody. But the other actually means to join as a disciple. Bartimaeus became a follower of Jesus. You know, there's a lot of stories that we read in the Gospels about Jesus healing people. Many people that he comes across, a man with leprosy, somebody who's deaf, a bleeding woman, even dead people that he raised back to life. And in almost all of those accounts, we don't hear the name of the person. So it's noticeable in Mark that he tells us his name is Bartimaeus. And the reason is because they knew him. They came to know him. He wasn't just this anonymous guy. He became one of them. When Jesus first started listening to him, that was an invitation to be part of their community where they would continue to get to know him and continue to love and care for Bartimaeus. Listening turned into discipleship. So what we're asking you to practice this week is less talking, more listening. Less talking, more listening. As you interact with people in your life who maybe haven't made a decision to follow Jesus, what would it be to just ask questions with the goal of getting to know them, not to fix their problem, not to even give them advice, not to even tell them what you think about what they're saying, but just to keep it about them. No one has ever complained that someone listened too much. There will come a time when it's your turn to talk. your turn to maybe share about you. But first, we have got to learn to listen.